Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast with Amy Wheeler. I've had the good fortune to travel the world learning about yoga therapy on a global scale, and I've been able to meet many of the leaders in the field along the way. I want to share with you what I'm learning as I interview our colleagues from around the world. My hope is that together we can reduce suffering of all sentient beings through our work as yoga teachers and yoga therapists. Hello. This episode with Heidi Crocker is one that's really close to my heart because I oftentimes see a lot of misinformation being thrown around the social media platforms about becoming a certified yoga therapist. And some of the questions I see people posting and then misinformation being passed, a lot of them are answered in this episode. So things like, do I really need to become a certified International Association of Yoga Therapists, what we call a C-IAYT, or can I just go to some random school and call myself a certified yoga therapist? That's a big question. Another question I hear people ask is, why aren't things going faster? How come there's not jobs out there? How do we get these hospitals to know who we are and what we do? And what is IAYT doing to make sure that we all have jobs when we graduate? That's a big question. Another question I oftentimes see is, how soon can the field of yoga therapy be licensed? Because I got a job offer from a hospital and they told me if I only have a license in yoga therapy, now I can become part of their team. So when is that going to happen? As if it's going to happen in 6 months or something. Another question I oftentimes hear people say is, what are the job prospects out there? Like, am I guaranteed a job when I graduate from a yoga therapy school? There's just all these really important questions that people are asking, and we need to be super, super realistic about the emerging field. So Heidi Crocker is someone that comes from higher education. She comes from the Southern California University of Health Sciences and some other institutions of higher education. She's been through the grinder with all of these questions in multiple fields that deal with integrative medicine. She is the perfect person for IAYT to have hired to help us go to the next step, go to the next level. And most of the questions that I'm asking Heidi in this interview came from my own students asking me these questions as the director of Optimal State Yoga Therapy. So I have a whole list of questions that every single cohort has these really important questions. And for me, this was a great opportunity to get Heidi answering all of them. Because if it's happening to me, I know it's happening to every other yoga therapy school also. So this interview is something that school directors can tap into and give to their students, people in the general public that are just curious, what is yoga therapy and where is this field at? This could even be for a 200-hour yoga teacher that is thinking about going into the field of yoga therapy, and what does that actually look like, and where are we as a field if you were to want to make this investment. And I also think all of the members of IAYT might be interested in hearing the very concise viewpoint of Heidi on where we are at and where we need to go. And even our international friends and community, we talk about that IAYT is an international organization, but many, many countries have their own organization, like the Japanese Yoga Therapy Society or like SVYASA in India. And how do all those international organizations fit together with what IAYT is doing? Because obviously, IAYT isn't the umbrella of all of those. We're like siblings, all working together worldwide to bring yoga therapy forward. So it's going to be a really interesting episode for all you yoga therapy nerds out there, or maybe yoga therapy wannabes. And I just want to thank Heidi for coming to educate us about these important issues. Welcome, Heidi. It's so nice to have you here. Thank you for joining me from Southern California.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Amy. It's good to be here. Good to connect with you again.
It is wonderful. And we're going to talk about so much amazing information today that I see people asking questions about all the time on the Facebook groups. So we're going to give all of this really amazing information in one short hour. But first, I want to talk to you about your background. You're the new Accreditation Manager at IAYT, International Association of Yoga Therapists. So first of all, for those of our listeners who don't really even know what accreditation means, you could tell us what it means to be the accreditation manager, and then a little bit about your background and why we chose you.
Yeah, well, I'm actually serving two roles right now at IAYT, the accreditation manager. So accreditation is the process of recognition or approval of yoga therapy programs. So it's called programmatic accreditation. In education, there's institutional accreditation, and there's also programmatic accreditation. And so IAYT has taken on this big responsibility to ensure that the yoga therapy programs that they're representing have minimum standards. So there's educational standards, educational competencies, and accreditation standards that they must follow. So I'm overseeing that. And I'm also overseeing the certification examination. So I'm the certification lead on that. And so we can talk about that a little bit later as well. I came into this position from higher education. I have been in health professions. I was a practicing chiropractor and yoga therapist for over 30 years now. About 15 years ago, I went back to school, got my doctorate in education, and have been in health professions education since then, serving as administration, a dean of academic affairs, a dean of the chiropractic college and integrative college of science at Southern California University of Health Sciences. So when this opportunity came up, I was actually the Dean of Academic Affairs at an institution that did not have health professions education. And so I had gotten a little away from my true passion and love. And so when this came available, I thought it was a wonderful opportunity to blend the two together. You know, the educational component of yoga therapy is growing as we move into a more structured clinical environments. So it's really a nice treat to be part of this process. Yeah.
It sounds to me like you are the perfect person for accreditation manager, as well as the certification exam, which we'll talk about. I mean, to find someone with 25 years of yoga experience, and you have been the dean and many other positions at integrative medicine universities of higher ed. I mean, wow, that's amazing. So Congratulations to you, but even more so, congratulations to us.
Yeah. Well, it's like those, your personal life and your professional life, when they can come together, that's just really magical for a lot of people. So I'm pretty excited to be part of this.
Great. So we've talked about the accreditation of programs a little bit, what I would call, schools. Like I have a yoga therapy training school, and I go through accreditation. So as you know, we just were up for our reaccreditation and turned in our materials. And if we pass, we will be good to teach for another 6 years until you want to look at our program again. So just to kind of make that concrete, what is accreditation? But tell us about, what does it mean to be credentialed? Because I think those two terms people are a little bit fuzzy on. What does it mean to be credentialed by IAYT?
Yeah. So IAYT has three prongs to it. It's a membership organization, it's a certification or a credentialing organization, and then it's taken on this role of the accreditation or overseeing yoga therapy education. So there's really three, and it's kind of a unique situation for one organization to be all three of these things to be housed under one organization. So what credentialing means is that a certification organization, decides or puts parameters around what is necessary, what needs to be accomplished to put their seal of approval. So to become a certified IAYT, or what that's really one of the few certifications for yoga therapists, only one in the United States. There's some that are equivalent in different countries, means that you've done a couple of things. When they started it, when you and I first started practicing yoga therapy, it wasn't a thing, right? We just did it. And as somebody who was brought yoga into a therapeutic lens. And so they grandparented people like us into that program is when it first started, right? So we had to prove that we had so many years of experience in different areas and document cases and all kinds of things to be grandparented in. But now, one of two things has to happen. You graduate from an accredited program, right? Because and we'll talk about that accreditation in a minute. Or they have a professional review and evaluation pathway right now that is, if you can still document and demonstrate that you have a significant amount of education and equivalent experience that would equate to a accredited program, then you can get your certification, your C-IAYT, through that pathway. What we're doing now, and just to talk about the accreditation exam, if that's okay, and where that fits into this.
Can we go back just 1 minute before we go there? So, this portfolio review as a pathway to become a certified IAYT yoga therapist. I just want to be clear, like, that's not like trying to get around the rules, like, oh, I'll just fill out this portfolio thing so I don't have to go through 3.5 years of school. That portfolio review is actually quite stringent. Isn't it true that the guidelines for that and what you need to turn in are as much or more than going through a regular school? Would you say that's true?
That is true. Yeah, that is true. The requirements are very detailed and extensive. So you can't just document, say, hey, I've been working in this clinic for 2 years. You have to demonstrate that you have a significant, and I don't have the numbers all memorized in my head, but a certain number of clinical hours with documentation of, the clients, the types of clients that you saw, how many times you saw those clients. So, a true record of your experiences that are diverse enough and over time to show that you are a generalist in yoga therapy. Like, so if you've been seeing one type of client that may be questioned, right? Because you might have, getting a C-IAYT is to show that you have a diverse amount of experience and knowledge.
Right. And yeah, I wanted to point that out because I think so many people are like, well, I took this yoga training, that yoga training, and that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, have you been acting as a true yoga therapist with assessment, with therapeutic planning, with, like you said, a wide variety of clients. I think just to get that in our head. And then before we go on to the certification exam and how that links back into credentialing, I oftentimes hear people say, well, I'm just going to go to this kind of medical yoga school over here. It's 1,000 hours and I'll be a certified yoga therapist, not a C-IAYT. But what is the benefit of actually going through an IAYT accredited school to become a C-IAYT, as opposed to maybe an organization that's decided to do something like medical yoga? I don't even know if there's a name of an organization out there called that, but you get the idea. Yeah. What's the benefit of joining in with IAYT?
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point. Where we are in our profession, you don't have to, right? But as an emerging profession, it's giving the public, giving other stakeholders, whether it's the clients that you're working with or the institution that's going to hire you, that they have, by being a C-IAYT, and graduating from an accredited program, they know There you have this minimum layer of competency. And you might have more, right? Depending on the program you went to, but they can be confident that you have a knowledge base, a skill base, and the ability to perform yoga therapy in a safe environment. Because the educational program that you went through has proven, has documented, right? We have standards, we have those educational competencies. And if the program is accredited, then we know that they're doing at least that amount, right? We're not, so it's really a public service, and it's a way to regulate a profession, a health profession, and safety. And, I honor IAYT for doing this, because if we don't self-regulate ourselves, then somebody else is eventually going to do it for us. And
absolutely. And I think that's what people don't understand. We could start up 35 different certified yoga therapist programs having nothing to do with IAYT, but ultimately that means the state governments are going to step in and regulate the field of yoga therapy. And people who don't even know anything about what we do will be regulating us, instead of us saying, we've done this for 15, 20 years. We're taking care of business. We have a national exam. We do accredit our schools. We are keeping an eye. So like you said, it's really a public service that IAYT is doing. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't go to those other programs. I think they're welcome to, but we're kind of a team trying to push this emerging field forward together.
Yeah. And, this idea of accreditation and certification, it's mainstream and it's best practices in health professions, right? That's true. But it also is in other professions. Like, for instance, ESL, English as a second language. ESL programs have programmatic accreditation. You have to be certified to teach ESL, so it's the same. And why does that happen? So that everyone knows that if the educational experience has minimal standards and they can pass this certification process, that there is a level of trust there. And so it's not
the
just
Wild West.
Yeah, it's not just the Wild West. And nobody's dictating how you have to practice yoga therapy. It's just, as you mentioned, there's the learning evaluation, you're learning record keeping, you're learning, you have the skills to be integrated into whatever environment you might find yourself.
Right. And we know that if you have C-IAYT after your name, that the hundreds of competencies that are required, like you said, record keeping, ability to assess from a yoga therapy perspective, the ability to have good ethics with your clients.
Right.
Those are all taken care of. It's not the Wild West where Amy Wheeler just decided to start a random certification program and we don't really know what Amy Wheeler is teaching. I mean, not that I didn't do that, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
So that brings us to this link between when an individual graduates from an accredited program or school, there's a step that needs to happen or will start to happen called the certification exam before they get the C-IAYT stamp.
Yeah.
Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So tell us about the certification exam, because I think a lot of people are excited by this, but a lot of people are really nervous. Like, what? I have to take a big exam to be a certified IAYT yoga therapist?
Yeah. So it's another step in the process. It's another step in the emerging profession of yoga therapy. And it's really a positive feedback loop for everybody involved, meaning that if you go through this program, you go through an accredited program and you sit for this exam. Okay, so you pass, right? You pass the exam. It shows that you have the knowledge and the skills and the abilities, but it also informs the program that you graduated from that we are teaching what the profession itself thinks that you need to know, right? So how did that all come about? So it's a positive feedback loop for everybody. So, when they were developing the questions for this certification exam, they first did a task analysis, right, from the profession. So sent this survey out to, the thousands of IAYT members and said, what do you do as a yoga therapist out there? What do you do in your daily world? And based on that information, that gave us what we call a blueprint, or the categories of areas of focus. And we brought in subject matter experts to come in and write questions on those areas, and developed a question pool, right? And right now, we're in the beta testing of those questions. So we're trying to validate that those questions are appropriate for an entry-level yoga therapist. So a yoga therapist that's entering into the profession.
Meaning they've just graduated. They don't have a whole lot of experience except for their practicum.
Right. So we put that inclusion criteria at 2 years or less experience. So 2 years or less, graduated from an accredited school, people that have gone through the portfolio review are experienced. That's how they got it, right? So we decided that was not part of the inclusion criteria. So the individuals that are participating as beta testers are recent graduates from the accredited schools and have been in practice for less than 2 years. So we have our first window of beta testing right now. We need about 100 participants to validate those questions. So we're not going to get 100 in this first window, so we'll be opening it up again in the spring for the second window.
And so, I keep close tabs on all these Facebook groups, and Facebook can be a really harsh place for multiple reasons. But, one of the critiques I have seen and I reflect on these things is, well, who's writing all these questions, and how do we know we can trust these people, and are they our kind of people? And look at the people that wrote those questions in that picture. And I just want to say this is a very hard job that IAYT has been doing since really 2007 is when we really jumped back in and started on this path. People are volunteering their time. They are taking nights and weekends. They're taking time away from their kids and soccer games and important family functions to help push this field forward. And while it may be an imperfect system of volunteerism, it's what we have. It's the reality. And I think people are actually doing a really, really amazing job. But I want to give a shout out to all those people who are volunteering. And I also want to say to those people who are maybe standing on the sidelines throwing stones, like, get in the game. If you're unhappy, get in the game, volunteer, get on these committees, share your knowledge, be with us. I mean, I think IAYT is becoming much more diverse and inclusive. There's more belonging than ever before. We're really strongly committed to that through the strategic plan. Come be on the team. Don't just stand on the sidelines and tell us why it's not working. This is a hard path forward.
Yeah. And with this certification exam, the beta testers, there's a uniqueness to these individuals. And at first, when we put the call out, I didn't get a lot of response at first. So I was kind of licking my wounds and saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I went to the program directors of these accredited programs. And I said, I need your help. Can you just ask your graduates if they would be willing to help? And the flood that came in was endearing. It really was just amazing. This is this beta test, it's a 6, not that the exam is going to be, but this portion of it is they have to give 6 hours of volunteer to sit and take a test. And it's heartwarming to know that there's so many people within our profession who think that we're on the right path. This is what is best for us.
Some people want things to move faster, but they go slowly when you're really being mindful and you're trying to do it correctly, and you've got to get volunteers and you've got to get the team behind you. And Like it's not one person running a race to the finish line. It's like running a marathon with 100 people. Like, oh, that one fell off. Come back. We'll slow down for you. Oh, okay. It's like herding cats, maybe.
Yeah. And, IAYT is really, we're not that old, right? As an organization, and they have ambitious goals, and there's a lot of excitement around it. But like you said, sometimes you just got to say, whoa, time out here for a minute. We need to be mindful about this. Let's not rush it. If it takes us an extra couple of months or extra couple of years, it's for the best. So let's do this right the first time. Yeah.
I always remember the field of acupuncture. They say they're 30 years ahead of us, and so I don't think many of us are thinking about, oh my gosh, we're laying the foundation for the people that come 30 to 40 years from now. Like, we want the job now. Where's the job description for, the Veterans Administration? We're not actually thinking of the fact that we're laying a really important foundation, and it has to be done well.
Yeah. Yep. And my dissertation for my doctorate degree was about the profession of pharmacy. Mm. So we know pharmacist as PharmD, right? A doctor of pharmacy. But they started out as just an apprentice type of environment, of educational learning. And it took them 40 years to get to the entry-level degree of a PharmD and give them the scope of practice that was encompassing of all of their knowledge. It took them 40 years. And they're really one of the first ones to ever make that change. They went from, just a certificate to, or nothing really, whoever gives you the blessing, to, a bachelor's degree, to a master's degree, to a PhD, because look how the industry has changed, right? So there's a lot of health professions that are, what is that entry-level degree? And yoga therapy is so vast. There's so much that it
variety.
What you can do with it. So we really need to have that movement of containing it into what our scope of practice is. And we're still struggling as a profession to even really define what that is. Right? We can't agree on what it is. And
I would say, if we look at that 40-year span for pharmacists, which isn't that different, because yoga therapy was kind of an apprentice type thing too, in my mind, we are maybe 15 years in.
That's about right.
So we're on chapter 2 or 3 out of, 12.
Right.
So
right.
Let's get back to the certification exam. You're going to do a beta test. You've got one group set up to go. I'm sure you'll take the results of that and refine it and do it again. And then what happens after you've got the actual questions that go on the exam?
Yeah. So, there may have to be some rewritten, and, there has to be an evaluation of those questions for sure. And then we can set what's called the cut score, which means what score do you need to get to pass? Is it going to be a 70%? Is it going to be 75? Is it going to be 80%? We don't know. We don't know what that cut score is. The way that these volunteers perform on that will help us determine that. Once we determine this cut score, then there'll be a slow rollout of making this exam part of the certification process. So you'll graduate from your program, you'll take this certification exam, you'll pass it for sure with flying colors. And then those two things together will apply and be granted a C-IAYT certification. The other part of the exam that's important for programs is that right now programs are having to do summative assessments. You've heard that word before, right? At the end of the program, somehow evaluate students to ensure that they have taken all of this knowledge, skills, and abilities and can integrate and disseminate yoga therapy, right? Yep. And so by having this certification exam, that takes a lot of the pressure off of the programs because they can use the certification exam as their summative evaluation. And that they don't have to each individually program do that. And it gets a playing field, right?
Yeah.
For
or
everyone.
A program could say, like what I've told my students is, I want to do a summative evaluation of the optimal state program to help you prepare to take this exam.
Yep.
Like it's kind of a practice. And if it don't do well on our exam, well, then we want to tweak it before you jump in there and try that exam.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And what I love about it is I'm going to get feedback. Hopefully, I don't know if this is true. You'll have to tell me, but could I get a score to see how many of my people passed the first time? What was my average percentage of the people in my program? What did they all? Can programs get that kind of data so we see, oh, our people aren't doing well in this area, and we better pump up the jam on that biomedical or philosophy or whatever?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That is part of the strategic plan, is that, that's that positive feedback loop where if you don't know what you don't know, right? And if you think you're giving all the information, but that's not what's happening out in practice, then we have to bring those two things together. And information like that is helpful to everyone. Yeah.
So some people might consider that a negative feedback loop. But
it's all positive.
That's all right. Positive. In yoga, there is no failure. It's just feedback.
That's right.
All right. So once we have this certification exam, and we're thinking maybe 2023, 2024, sometime in that window that it will be ready, and graduates from this date forward will be taking it. Some people say, well, are we ready for licensure then? Meaning, is that when the field can start doing licensure and we can get in every hospital because we now have a license? Could you talk about, number one, what does licensure actually mean? How do we get it? Nationally or state by state or internationally, and just kind of walk us through that, because so many people wonder why we can't just jump to that step tomorrow.
Yeah. It's a really complicated step. So certification is, again, it's that self-governance of our own profession, right? We have said we have something that's overseeing ourselves. But when you get into licensure, it's pretty complicated. And one of the things that in many layers. So one of the things is that, just as you mentioned, it's decided upon state by state, country by country. So you have to have a lot more input, and the process of it is different state by state. So let's say if you would just use the state of California, for example. In the state of California, you have, if you want to go for licensure of a new profession, you have to have a existing profession sponsor you, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a thing. Like, then you have to, go through the sunrise process of applying that this profession thinks you are so valuable that will take you under your wing until they open it up for licensure, right, within your state.
So does that mean yoga therapy? Let's say that the American Medical Association in California chapter said, we love yoga therapy. Does that mean we would actually be operating under them for a period of time before they kicked us out of the nest and we went off on our own?
That is correct.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
And each state would have to find an existing organization to host.
Well, I don't know if that's done in each state.
Okay. It's different for each state.
It's different for each state. The scope of practice can be defined by each state, right? So I'll use the example, I'm a chiropractor, and Washington State has a very strict scope of practice for chiropractors. Very strict. Manual manipulation is just about all you can do. But go across the border to the state of Oregon, who has one of the most liberal scopes of practice. We have the ability to be primary involvement in childbirth. So it's just well, so what do you do, right? So if when I went to chiropractic school, to an accredited program that had this baseline, one of the things we did not learn was minor surgery and delivering babies. So when I wanted to take the Oregon State board exam, I had to go to Oregon and take these courses, because if I got my license there under the scope of practice, I could do those things. It's really complicated to get licensure, and it has to be strategically and systematically thought out. And we're an international organization, right? So we have to look at it internationally as well. Going back to chiropractic, there are many countries where chiropractic there's no license for chiropractic, right? You're considered practicing medicine without a license. So it's a very convoluted process with no organized rules, right? So you have to really look at this like a worldwide thing, and how are we going to tackle that? Right.
I was just going to say that a small nonprofit organization like IAYT with maybe 6,000 members, like how do you even decide, okay, we're going to do it in California and the rest of you states, oh, well, like what? It's like an elephant and trying to eat an elephant. Like where would you even start to bite,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, those low-lying fruit, but we also have to make the decision if licensure is actually what has to happen. We do have models to look at. If we would look at professions such as art therapy, music therapy, dance therapy, and look at those models versus looking at PT, OT models, right? We might glean some more information that is licensure really what we need?
And so you're saying like dance therapy, music therapy, they're operating, they're getting paid by third parties. They're doing all the things we want to do, but they haven't actually become a licensed profession. But that doesn't mean that great things aren't happening there in hospitals, Right.
And so, part of it is that autonomy. So we've made the decision, you know, it's like how much autonomy, not that we need, but are we willing to work in a collaborative environment and under a certification level, or do we want to have that full autonomy of diagnosis and all of that under a licensed?
It sounds so like fancy to have a license, like, oh, I want that. But the truth is, it's going to cost a lot more to do business. You're going to have to be paying all these huge yearly fees. As an individual who wants to keep their license going, you're going to have a lot of expensive CE requirements. You're going to be subject to the ADA, American Disability, like your office is going to have a ramp, and it's going to have a bathroom with a 42-inch door, and, all this stuff that we have to really think about, like, what would that mean? How many clients would I need per week to even sustain my business, knowing there's going to be all these extra fees? I mean, this is why I'm glad IAYT is taking it slow, because we have to get word out about what yoga therapy is and educate healthcare and the general public to create the demand so that we get enough work, so that if we ever did want to get licensed, the financial loop could come back around and work. And right now, I personally don't think we're there.
Especially coming into this position. And I had worked with several programs, helped them go through the accreditation process. So going back to that programmatic educational accreditation, what I experienced was, and this is my personal experience, and I'm seeing it now that I'm in this role, is that in yoga, it's still quite a bit of that apprentice, guru, teacher, student level of education. I have all of this good knowledge in my mind and my brain and these historical texts, and I'm just going to give you my knowledge, and you're going to take my knowledge and go. But that's not how education is evolving. So these individuals, these wonderful yoga therapists who want to share their knowledge and produce students, right? New yoga therapists, but they aren't familiar with the nomenclature and the processes of how individuals actually learn. So they're struggling to write and demonstrate that all of this great stuff that they have in their program, they have to do some self-reflection and self-study and say, what does this look like to the learner? What does this look like, to other people who want to see what I'm teaching in this program? So this educational component of it is being modeled after what happens in programmatic accreditation in any other program, right? That is the model. And yoga therapists who have this wonderful knowledge don't necessarily understand that educational component. So I think that before we get into the licensure conversation, we have to get this, even how we train, not what we say, not what we train, but how we do it, kind of solidified and in place. Right. So,
I'll give an example. I was talking to a friend in New York, a yoga therapist in New York, and she says, Amy, is it all the people with other licenses that are getting all the jobs? If you're singularly an IAYT therapist, you won't get the job. But if you are a C-IAYT and a social worker, now you have a license. She said, is that true? And I said, I don't think it is. I said, the people who create an amazing 8 weeks yoga therapy for diabetes program and go, or whatever content you have, and go present it to a hospital and say, look, I've got this great 8-week program. I've done some mini pilot studies to show that it changes these things in the client's experience, behavior, moods, energy levels, sleep, whatever their data collection is. Hospitals, they aren't going to say, do you have a license? They're going to say, that's really interesting. I think that program could fit into our health education department. So what I sent her was a big battery of kind of tests that when she creates her programs for asthma, for whatever she wants to do, low back pain, that she actually collects some data with her clients, even if it's N of 6, so that when she goes to a local healthcare provider, she can say, look, it was 6 people, but here's the great results we have. Why don't we try this here? And she really liked that idea that she had some autonomy to possibly get hired, and that it wasn't just that she needed to go get some other degree to get her in the door. Right.
And I can speak to that on a personal level because I'm working as a yoga therapist at a health system within a major university here in Orange County. And I was brought on as a yoga therapist and a yoga therapist only, and not a chiropractor in any way, shape, or form. And they don't have any interest in bringing chiropractic into this integrative space, but the yoga therapy they did. So I think that you're absolutely right. That's a rumor that's out there, right? I think one thing that having the professional license does allow you to do is it allows a smoother transition into the system, the healthcare system, right? The record keeping, the way you communicate with other health professionals, the language that you use, that makes a difference sometimes. I do know an individual, going back to that accredited program and certification, having something. A hospital here in Whittier, California, had a large yoga program, yoga and yoga therapy, especially in the OBGYN department, right, for many, many years. And this particular yogi, she was just a yogi who was actually trained in India. So that she wasn't a C-IAYT, but she was a yoga therapist, right, from India. But she had not been through an approved program here in the United States. And they told her, we need your certification. We need your record. And she said, I don't have anything. And they said, well, you're going to have to do this. So we're going to give you a year to get your certification, or you're going to lose your job. right? So it wasn't that they were asking to, go and be a health professional of some other way, but just give us something that shows that you have this minimal competency. And that's where that certification comes in.
That's what people don't see coming, is these third-party systems like this hospital in Whittier. When they start to learn that there is such thing as International Association of Yoga Therapists that has a certification exam, that has accredited schools, that the accreditation department is separate from the board of directors of IAYT, which is something we didn't really talk about, but it's that it's an autonomous accreditation committee. That's when they're going to start saying, oh, we want that one. Mm-hmm. We don't want the Wild West school over there that just threw their own curriculum together. We actually want that one. And if we can't have that one, we'll just hire somebody else who has that C-IAYT. I think that's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's happening. It's already in certain environments, it is happening. And so, that trend, I don't think it's going to stop. Yeah.
So Heidi, it could be very disappointing for some listening that, oh my gosh, licensure is so far off. It's so complicated. It's so complex. What is there left for us? And before the show, you and I talked about these things called the ICD-10 code and the CPT therapeutic code. Mm-hmm. Tell us, because those are something every single one of us can use right here, right now. We can march into the hospital with these codes and essentially get the same work done. Not the same work, but very great work done without a license.
You're absolutely right. I mean, this is a big step, right? So the ICD-10 code, they just added one for the 2022.
What does ICD mean? I think do you remember what that stands for? I can look it up. You keep talking.
They're diagnostic codes. It's the diagnosis for the therapeutic lens, right? So it's for yoga therapy, that's going to be, they have a diagnosis of something that is going to be treated by yoga therapy. They've added this code. And
okay, I looked it up. It says the ICD-10 is a clinical code database for diagnostic classification of standard of reporting diseases, disorders, injuries, health conditions for all clinical and research purposes. So basically a diagnosis code, as you were saying.
Right. They have one for the 2022, which is valid from October 1st, 2021 to September 30th, 2022. And it has, a dollar amount on it. So the CPT code, which is the current procedure terminology, is what you put down as the treatment that you're giving them, right? And it has dollar amounts associated with it. So are these things being covered? Well, as of right now, under our scope, we don't have the ability to diagnose, right? So they're doing a lot of co-treatments where they will see a primary doctor of whatever sort, a healthcare professional. I should probably say that, the healthcare professional. And in the same treatment, same visit, the treatment is actually administered by the yoga therapist.
So on a practical level, that looks like you're working maybe with a doctor. Like my doctor is a wonderful Western allopathic medical doctor who also happens to be an Indian woman who's well-versed in Ayurveda. And if she would offer me one of her rooms at her clinic, people would come in and have their 7 minutes with her. And then she would say, and, go over and see Amy. And then she could basically bill X amount of money for their visit with her, their visit with Amy. And then she would pay me X amount per hour for working. And I do have a doctor that has asked me to do this. I don't have time, but there are doctors out there that are interested in having us come and actually have a room right there in the medical facility.
That's right. Yep. So it's the foundation is being set. It's sort of up to us to say, I'm willing to work under that restriction, or we're better than that restriction. And that's where licensure has to come in. Right. But I think there's some beauty to that. It's like, I don't have to necessarily be responsible for that diagnosis, right? If you're working with a clinical in a psychiatric clinical setting and they've made those hard diagnostic decisions that what is this anxiety or is this depression? Whew, sometimes we don't know, right? But if you have that support and then you can treat them with the tools that you have and walk away at the end of the day knowing that you weren't all by yourself, you had that collaboration, that interprofessional collaboration. That's where healthcare really needs to be, is where we're working together, not in our own silos. I think the foundation has already been set for us to have a wonderful profession, and it might not necessarily need to be licensed. We haven't done our due diligence on investigating that yet.
So I have students that are just figuring all of this out. And when they go to, say, a rural healthcare clinic, which, by the way, is a great gap in the medical system, those rural areas cannot get licensed healthcare providers to move out into the boondocks and take care of people. So if you live in a rural area, this may be your ticket in, or if you're willing to move to a rural area, and they're going to like the head of this, say, women's clinic, that does women's services. And you as a yoga therapist need to walk in and say, hey, I have an ICD-10 code for diagnostics that you can actually submit bills to the insurance company based on the diagnosis that you're giving this woman. And then I can also bring you a CPT code that we can turn in for the therapeutic modalities that I used with this woman and get paid for that too. I think if people knew what those two codes were, and we can put them in the show notes, and we just start approaching even city doctors. I mean, I'm sure they'd be up for it too, but just go in and show them, hey, this is how it can work, because they don't have the time and energy to figure that out. But if we bring it to them and say, I want to work with you 20 hours a week, here's how it can be done, boom, there's no way they won't hire us. They are desperate for the help. They just don't want to do the research on figuring out how all the dominoes need to line up.
Right. And it is doing them a service, because they don't, like you mentioned, they don't have time. They let them do what they do best, right? You see those acute injuries or acute situations, but those ones that need the extra support, which they don't have time in that 7-minute visit, right? Yeah. We're here to take that pressure off of you. It's where I'm seeing it through my own lens is through the osteopathic physicians, right? That they do musculoskeletal type of work. They work with a lot of chronic pain management systems, but they don't have time because their scope of practice is so wide that to do all of that therapy. So they let us do it. And then they're like, oh, I know that the person is in good hands. They're getting whether it be for a physical injury or whatever, they're getting the treatment that they need. And that allows me to do what I do best over here. And even if they are a yoga therapist, that osteopath might be a yoga therapist, but you don't have time to do it all. And so there's been a lot of conversation about that licensed healthcare practitioner, and should they be, they're just going to take the work. And it's just the more healthcare practitioners that we can educate in yoga, about the tools. And if that means that they go through a yoga therapy training program and they are like, now I know how this stuff works, I'm be happy to refer. Right. But if they don't have that understanding, and it's hard to get that understanding without experiencing it. So I'm an advocate for.
I just want to reiterate that we are not in competition with psychologists or PTs or OTs or any of it. They've got their own job to do. Most of them don't want to leave their current position to become a yoga therapist. But if we work with them, they'll be happy to hire one.
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And they might be able to do, here's a little breathing technique, right? I can show you that, but you need a yoga therapist.
You need 45 minutes with a true yoga therapist.
That's right.
Yeah. So, well, I think that's very hope-filled that people can advocate for themselves and get work, as we said, with other psychologists or medical professionals. And then there's the people who are like, you know what? I'm good at getting my own clients. I have my backyard yoga studio, and I'm seeing 12 people a week, both individually and some functional groups. And I'm cool with that. I'm making $6,000 a month. I don't really actually need to go and hook up with a medical facility. I know plenty of yoga therapists that through word of mouth, they don't do any social media. They don't do anything. People tell people when you do good work and you get results, and they've got a full plate for what they want out of the profession. Yeah. So I don't want to leave those people out either, because I think that's a really autonomous way to work. You set your hours, you set your schedule. You don't have to turn in any billing or do any paperwork for somebody else. Just keep your own good records. And I just want to honor those people too.
There's a lot of health professions that are moving in that direction. I worked many, many years in the converted dining room of my home, right? Of seeing chiropractic patients and yoga therapy, clients, and I didn't want anybody, that was my simple thing. But I think the thing to remember is we don't know when we have students graduate, new yoga therapists into the profession, we don't know where they're going to end up.
Right.
And as a profession, we need to ensure that they have a basic knowledge, skill, so that if they have that opportunity to work with, in those kinds of environments, that we know that they're prepared and they're going to represent us well. So, yeah, yoga.
I have students that are saying, they're 2/3 of the way through a program and they're like, well, I'm only going to work in this way with these types of people. And I just have a smile, because I think none of us know where we're going to be in 5 years. We have no clue. And let's just be open. We can have a goal and we can work towards that goal, and we can work within our values and our beliefs and aspirations. But the truth is, it's wide open.
Yeah.
It is so wide open.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great. It's exciting. It's very exciting. I think.
It is. If we didn't have this openness, we wouldn't be able to create our future together, right? Everything would be set in stone already.
Right.
So Heidi, do you have any last words, anything we didn't cover that you really wanted to make sure we got the word out? I think we've done a pretty good job breaking it down.
Yeah. No, I just think one of the elements that seems to be it's not a barrier. It's just something we have to figure out is the international lens. Like, what does this yoga therapy look like globally? And, that's something that is challenging to have those conversations. And I know you've been on that platform, and
I'm in the Global Yoga Therapy Consortium, with all the other world leaders, and we all love each other. We talk on WhatsApp every single day. Like, there's a WhatsApp group that people from China, Korea, Japan, India, Australia, New Zealand, I probably have 6 messages waiting from our friends in all those countries right now. But we're kind of in agreeing to disagree, that we don't all agree on what yoga therapy needs to look like worldwide. And we're okay with that. I think for now, we're in relationship. It's been about 2, maybe 3 years where we've been in constant communication. We enjoy each other. We're going to each other's conferences. We're cross-pollinating. That's where we're at right now.
Yeah. And that's okay.
and the Japanese way of doing things is to get to know each other and develop an affinity and an affection, and then decide if you want to do business.
Right.
And I think that's what we're doing it. We're doing it the Japanese way. And then there may be a point where we say, you know what, let's do this. And you probably know too, Heidi, the WHO, the World Health Organization standards are being set by this group that I'm talking about. And some people love the standards that are being proposed to the WHO, and some people are like, no, that is not okay.
Yeah.
But it's it just is what it is. There's no need
is.
to get mad at each other that we have different ideas. I think in the end, if we can just stay in relationship and keep the conversation going, we will be stronger in the end, and we will come to a consensus. It might be in 5 to 7 years, but that's okay. We've got time.
And some of it is that the public, they're the ones that are going to help us shape these decisions. It's like if they start to ask for and want and need, well, we know that they need yoga therapy, but if they really start to understand it, that will help shape. So I think, it's that grassroots, it's that one person at a time, healing process that's gonna make shape these decisions for us. So,
or somebody's going to get involved with, a big company like United Healthcare, and then boom, the industry is going to have like a huge seismic shift.
Yep.
In one day.
Let's wait till 2023.
Okay. but just, knowing that at any time, some CEO out there could have his back pain healed by yoga therapy and decide, he or she, I should say, or they decide, I want this. Let's do this. We got this. So we never know what's on the horizon.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Heidi. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you. And I feel like this is going to be a very popular episode, because whenever these issues come up, we can just put it in the chat. Like, here it is from the horse's mouth.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to kind of bring this up. These are things that people, the average yoga therapist may not be thinking about. So it's kind of an esoteric concept to a lot of people. So I really appreciate all the work that you do and all the work that you've done in the past for IAYT. And just thank you so much for the opportunity to connect.
Thanks, Heidi. So I hope you have enjoyed this very heady episode of the Yoga Therapy Hour. And I hope we've given you some ideas, especially those of you that are practicing yoga therapists or just graduating and wanting to start building your business. This idea of going to healthcare professionals, licensed healthcare professionals, clinics, hospitals, and say, look, there's an ICD-10 code that you can use to get me involved as a yoga therapist, meaning the ICD-10 code is all about diagnosis, that in order to give care, there must be a diagnosis. And it may be a diagnosis that the doctor or the physician's assistant or the PT or the OT, whoever the licensed healthcare professional is, it may be they are diagnosing and saying this person has anxiety and panic attacks, and I'm diagnosing that. And my treatment plan is to have a yoga therapist work underneath me that I can refer to, probably under the same roof, meaning they're not going to have you bring clients to your home and your backdoor studio in the garage. That's probably not happening. It's probably in a medical facility, but that doctor can do a CPT code, which is meant for yoga therapy. There's a actual yoga therapy ICD and CPT code that says, here's the treatment plan that we're going to be giving because I've diagnosed this person with anxiety and depression. So I think what more people need to be thinking about is not waiting around for licensure. You could be retired by the time that happens. And as Heidi described, it just may not happen in your state. There may be 3 or 4 states that get it in the next 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, but not your state. So I think instead of waiting for some big governmental thing to happen, it's a much smarter way to go to your clinic, your local clinic, and introduce yourself and say, I have a program. I've run it twice before out of my home or out of this studio. I've collected this data. Here's our results. And it can just be pre and post tests. And, I think it could work in your clinic, and you could bill it under the ICD-10 code for yoga therapy and the CPT code for yoga therapy. You could make a little money. I could make money, and the clients could be served. And as I said before, I think especially in rural areas and areas where it's hard to get medical professionals to move and practice, this is the ticket. And there's a lot of you out there. I live in a rural area. I live up in the woods and in a cabin. This is the kind of thing that they just might go for. And I think the first step is to build a relationship and maybe invite somebody who has the decision-making capacity, invite them to take your yoga therapy class or give them, a free assessment and show them what you do, and then show them, and here's the practice I would write for you. It's not that you're going to be giving away everything for free forever, but if there's particular people who are in a high-level position that could make decisions to bring you in under the ICD and the CPT codes, those people are worth giving a private lesson or two to show them in an educational way, this is what I would be doing with your clients. It's almost like a job interview, that you're doing something very practical, very applied, and go from there and build relationship and stay in touch and make it easy for them. I think that's the big lesson, is you're going to have to do the groundwork to educate them. I mean, they know what an ICD and a CPT code is. They work with them all day, every day, but you're going to have to educate them that you as a yoga therapist can tap into that network, and that we actually have codes that are ready. There's a number waiting to be used. They may not understand that that's already been approved for yoga therapy. So I wish you well on your journey. Keep us posted. If you are willing, we would love to have you post a positive review on things like Apple Podcasts. I think we've got 19 reviews, all 5 stars so far. And the more we get, the more listeners we can reach. And then also we have a private Facebook group called the Yoga Therapy Hour Podcast. And we have about 600 or 700 members in there that are talking about these podcasts. And we would love to invite you there. It's free, and you just come over and we'll accept you on Facebook. So there's lots of ways to be involved with this podcast. If you're interested in helping us out financially, you could always sponsor an episode. It does cost money to produce all of these podcasts, and we're always looking for people who would like to sponsor us. We've already got 2 main sponsors recently that are basically, we plug them for maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and then they help us pay for production costs, especially if our audience overlaps with the audience that you want to reach. Maybe you're an Ayurvedic herb company and you want to reach, right now we have about 7,500 downloads just in the past few months. That's a really good gig for somebody to market to people who will probably use those herbs or whatever it is that you want to offer in service to the world. So we're always looking for sponsors, and you can just contact us at our website, www.amywheeler.com. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Yoga Therapy Hour with Amy Wheeler podcast. Another nonprofit organization that we like to support through this podcast is the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandram in Chennai, India. They are the source for the teachings of the Optimal State Yoga Therapy School, and we are so grateful. The KYM's Mitra division offers free yoga therapy training to a large number of socially and economically underprivileged children and women in Chennai. Feel free to support them through the link listed below on Red Circle. And we also have details on our website, which is also listed below. And finally, a special thank you to our team here at Optimal State. We are truly a global family. George Mantuan, one of our executive producers. Adam Satchel, senior media producer and sound engineer from the Philippines. Krishna Panchal, a producer from Canada. Modupe Abdullahi, who does the show notes and is an editor for us from Nigeria. And Peter Morley, who wrote and produced the music for this show, who lives in Australia. Find more about Peter's work at www.zenmusic.biz. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.